Hi and welcome to the video. I'm going to be talking you through how to paint this wet street scene. It's a street scene of London with some cars, a lot of pedestrians and buildings in the background. So I'm going to go through and show you how I planned this out. So I'm actually putting through just some of the details in the front first. So I've popped in the horizon line. Then I've started to indicate some of these cars, and notice I'm being very loose with them. I'm adding them in, but I'm not trying to copy the reference picture exactly. I'm just following the outline of the path on the left and just going through and modifying some of these buildings as well. One of the things I noticed about the reference picture is that there's not too many contrasts, not too many obvious contrasts, especially bits of light, and I really want to emphasize that a bit more in the painting just to make it more interesting, especially because we're not going to be able to get in all the details of this photograph. So just going in and making some of those buildings kind of have a front side and a back side. You can sort of see the sides of the buildings, which I'm trying to get some light to come through from the left side of the reference photo. I'm trying to get in some of those buildings in the background as well, and they're really good just to indicate very lightly later on, give the painting a sense of depth. And these buildings on the right hand side too. And just adding in a few figures in the foreground, larger car to the left hand side. I thought I'd add in another one just a bit closer, and a bigger figure on the right hand side. So going in now and using a large mop brush, I'm just using a greyish colour, a warmer grey, and adding in a little bit of blue in there as well. For the buildings, I'm going to warm them up. So this is just a bit of yellow ochre and some gamboge mixed together. I think there's a little bit of orange in there as well. Just being careful to cut around the cars and figures here in the foreground. And while the paint's still wet, I just like to drop in a bit of darkness in there as well, blending nicely. I'm carrying this mix all the way down to the foreground, and notice here that I'm just adding a bit of orange below the cars, and that's to indicate the tail lights of the cars. So for this kind of wet road effect, and I'm dropping in some of the colors for the cars now, tail lights for the cars on the left hand side, just letting it bleed into the mix here. All very loose at this stage. And I've got the page on a slight slant as well to just encourage that paint to move downwards. A bit of colour in for the figures and pop in the legs. What I'm doing is now I'm just grabbing a flat brush and just dragging that down the paper. I've got the brush is a little bit wet, and this is just going to create these reflection-like effects in the foreground. Okay, so now that it's all dried, I'm just going in with a small round brush now and getting in some details for the buildings to the right. And we're imagining some light coming in from the left hand side, hitting the sides of the buildings, the front of the buildings, and then the sides we're going to get a bit darker. So I'm using a flat brush here just to indicate that. And at the bottom of the buildings as well, I'm just darkening more, getting in the dome now in the center of the page. And remembering to leave some of that wash, that previous wash as well. It's going to keep things interesting. A bit of negative painting here to indicate some buildings with some light hitting them, and those lighter buildings to the left hand side. You can see a bit of that light that I've got just catching on the sides of the buildings to the left as well. And then these shades, shade cloths and things on the buildings to the left closest. Just painting around to leave a bit of that nice orange color. Okay, now going in and I'm just darkening a few bits and pieces here. I'm just using a bit of darker neutral tint and detailing and adding windows, perspective lines on some of these buildings. Some of it's still wet into wet. Pop in some birds there too, and a bit more detail on the figures. I'm just going to emphasize their legs so that they pop out a bit more, a bit of colour for their heads. And a bit of gouache to finish it off, really, just bits of blue and direction lines now. And we're almost done. Bit of gouache with the highlights. Check out these tutorials down the side here. I've got a couple of playlists that will help you get some ideas and improve your watercolors.